Sherard, what a pleasure to see you.
Wei, it's my pleasure to be back here in Beijing.
I remember doing an interview series back in Britain years ago. At that time, the world was very different. And now, sir, you are working in a position that has to deal with all the turbulences. How does that work?
Wei, it's not so tough because we know it's the right thing to do. We know that it's win-win. We know that it's in the interests of the great British companies, 500 of whom belong to the China-Britain Business Council. But we also know it's in China's interest. It's the right thing to do. And I have not the slightest hesitation in believing that it was important that we came, not only that we came, but that we'll come back in the weeks and months ahead.
Looking forward to that already. Well, I'm talking to you right now. Yes. But you know, how are you going to deal with the ever-changing picture of geopolitics? I mean, business needs stability, predictability, but now it seems all of these words are out of the window.
Well, Wei, as you probably know, I'm a former diplomat, a former ambassador, and the only sensible policy for great powers in engaging with each other is, of course, you may need to disagree, but if you do so, do it respectfully and courteously and preferably in private. Stand up for your values, but don't interfere with others' values, and then maximize the areas of economic, commercial, cultural, educational cooperation. That's the only sensible policy. We were delighted to welcome Vice President Han Zheng to London for the coronation of His Majesty the King, and I had the honor of hosting a business dinner in the honor of the Vice President. And he was seen by the King, the Prince of Wales, the Prime Minister, the Deputy Prime Minister, the Foreign Minister, and that's helped relaunch this relationship and give us the background for what's been a very successful visit by the China-Britain Business Council.
It's really not just the formalities of events. It is really about people to people looking in the eyes.
I could not agree more. And reminding each other that in the end we're all human beings, wanting a better future for our parents, for our children, for our families, and for our countries.
Now, these days, some politicians have been complaining that the business communities around the world are quote-unquote naive because they don't understand, quote-unquote, the complexities. Now, I really wonder, from your perspective, you've been in politics, doing diplomacy. You are now representing businesses, British businesses around the world. So how do you see, you know, the role of business today and the divergence between business and politics these days?
Well, I'm afraid I think the politicians in my own country, in America and elsewhere, who demonize China, who see the world as black and white, it is they who are naive. We in business understand the complexities, the need to maximize advantage, not to be afraid of disagreeing if you need to disagree, but always to do so with courtesy and respect. So I completely reject the charge of naivety. And some of the nonsense we hear talked in the US Congress, in the US media, and in parts of the Parliament in London about China these days just shows how ignorant people are and how prejudiced. And they need to come to China and see for themselves the realities.
When you go back home, if someone, you know, average Joe on the street say, oh, I heard you made a trip to China. What did you see? What do you want to tell them?
I will tell them I crossed the border into Shenzhen and saw that 1/3 of the cars on the streets of Shenzhen are electric powered. I come here and I see the future. I see the digital economy in operation. I see hundreds of millions of people enjoying happier, more prosperous, more secure lives than they have ever done in the past. And I see a country bouncing back after the COVID-19 pandemic, and doing so with quiet confidence, aware of the challenges, but also determined to be optimistic about the future.
China is also changing.
Of course.
Yeah. So it's a very, I guess you have fresh eyes discovering all the changes.
Well, I first came here before you were born, Wei, in 1985. And I went to the Forbidden City then. And yesterday I went to the Forbidden City. and saw at a private tour of the museum and saw there the slogan, "This museum is about yesterday, today, and tomorrow." For 20 of the past 22 centuries of human history, China has been the world's largest economy, and I predict it will be again. And this visit is not just about the past, the 70 years which the China-Britain Business Council has kept this connection between Yingguo and Zhongguo. It's also about the future of that relationship.
We have seen in recent days the current events seem to not support necessarily the potential that you have been talking about, sir. For example, what you see in the news, whether it is the Prime Minister talk during the G7 summit, or some of the politicians in the Parliament talking about China or China-UK relations, it seems that they are talking in a very different tone. So how would you, trying to build this very mutually beneficial relationship, deal with all of these rhetorics?
Well, what we do is set out the facts of the economic engagement between our two countries, the existential importance of the Chinese economy, of the Chinese students, hundreds of thousands of whom we welcome to Britain, for our country and for the connectivity between two of us. We let the facts speak for themselves. And I know the rhetoric from the politicians is sometimes exaggerated or extreme, but in our private engagement with them, they are much more sensible. And as I said to Mr. Qin Gang this week, State Councillor Qin Gang, the task now, we have got them at last in a position where they understand privately the importance of this relationship. We've now got to move to the next stage where they match their actions, their public actions, with their private words. And I'm confident that we will be able to do so in the weeks and months ahead.
I'm impressed by your confidence in that direction. Certainly that takes a lot of work in order to express that confidence.
It does, Wei. It takes a lot of work, a lot of quiet diplomacy behind the scenes. We work very closely with your excellent ambassador in London and his team, and we just quietly make the case, not just to ministers, but to their advisors, to people in the media, to people in both parties in Parliament. And we've made it around the country, out in the regions of England and Scotland and Wales, where so many jobs depend on either exports to China or investment from China.
I've heard from many friends who are in similar position, but certainly you have much more respect among many about whether they feel like a loner.
No.
But they told me no.
No.
There are many people supporting them.
There are many people.
Yeah, from the heart out.
From the head and from the heart. My heart, I learned as a schoolboy the importance of China. I had a wise teacher who told me that in our lifetimes China would matter again. But that's from the heart. But it's also from the head. It's a calculation that this is a win-win relationship between our two countries.
Talking about China-UK business relationship, where are the areas, sir, after talking to your colleagues around the UK, are looking at as the best potential?
Well, of course, it's the technologies of the future. It's new energy vehicles, it's the digital economy, it's the transition to net zero, it's batteries, but it's also healthcare. We both have aging populations. We both have new techniques of delivering medicine, delivering care to our populations. So there's so many exciting areas where we can work together and will work together, and in fact are working together.
When we talk about working together, are working together these days,
yes.
I am impressed by your colleagues who are actually in the room right now while we're talking, their work in China.
Well, I'm impressed by them as well, Wei. They've been here through thick and thin, through lockdown, and I can tell you that last week trade between Britain and China passed the £100 billion mark for the first time in history.
What does that mean?
It means an enormous amount. It means jobs in Yorkshire. It means investment in Shanghai. It means you buying Burberry clothes or riding in a Range Rover. It means Chinese students in Glasgow or Manchester or Oxford or Cambridge. It means better lives for both our peoples. Yeah. That's what trade's about. Trade isn't an end in itself. It's a means to improving the human condition.
Now, the UK has been out of the European Union, and the UK has been trying to look for new ways to develop its economy. Yeah. How important is China to be a business partner and to be a partner on many of the other fronts?
Well, I greatly regret us leaving the European Union, but we've done so. And you rightly say it's actually even more important than it was before that we engage with China. Britain's three largest trading partners are the United States, the European Union, and Zhongguo, China.
Sir, my last question. If you got an opportunity to talk to leaders of both sides, China and the UK, in public, right now, what are you going to say to them?
I would say two words written by the great English writer E.M. Foster 100 years ago. Only connect. Only connect. And connection, communication, leads to understanding and to mutual benefit.
Greatly appreciated. Thank you so much for joining us.
Great pleasure.